Hello, and welcome to the movie universe. I'm your host, Movie Fan. Today, I'm going to talk about something very special. I'm going to be talking about legendary animator Max Fleischer. There was a time a lot of people didn't know his name or had forgotten it, but now he's being hailed like crazy on the internet for his ingenious approach to animation because this guy was well ahead of his time. Max Fleischer, as most of us know, is responsible for creating characters like Betty Boop and Popeye the Sailor. Well, okay, technically he didn't create Popeye the Sailor, he just brought him to life on the silver screen. But there was a lot more to him than met the eye, because this guy, as I said before, was way ahead of his time. Because he was the first animator to try to make cartoons as real as possible. He tried to make their movements fluid and, basically like what I'm doing now, just make it all fluid, just move like real people. He was one of the first ones to do that because originally they were very clunky and slow, and basically it looked like someone dancing the robot, and that's the truth. But he changed all that with mainly one invention, rotoscoping. Now, how rotoscoping works is really a lot more simple than you think. Well, the idea of it anyway. What he would do is he would film a person moving, and he would take the film, put it on a projector, and have it project towards a screen that's on a drawing table. And they would put tracing paper on the screen, of course, and they would painstakingly draw every little frame. That's how it worked. When Fleischer did this, he set a whole new standard for film everywhere because, like I said, originally they were really jerky movements. In this case, he gave it fluid animation where they actually, looked like they were moving like real people. So that was a very big deal. And that legacy continues. He was ahead of his time with that one because that paved the way for motion capture. Because the fact is, motion capture is on the same principle. The only difference is they're using digital technology to, just put dots on the face to try to, get somebody's movements right, like the way their mouth is moving and the way their arms are moving, and so on and so forth. That way, you can make the beast look, as real as possible, or make the Hulk look as real as possible. But that was just one of many great inventions that he created. It's one of his greatest inventions that kept for a long time and still continues to this day is the old concept of the sing-along. Some of you might remember this old line, follow the bouncing ball. That was Max Fleischer. He was the one who coined that term, and he was the one who created that whole concept. Probably one of my favorites is how he did a sing-along for Popeye the Sailor's theme. Yep, he actually did that for the famous theme song to Popeye the Sailor. Probably one of the most amazing things about this is he did this sort of thing before Walt Disney did. But that's not to say that Disney didn't steal the concept of rotoscoping from Max Fleischer back in 1934 when he did Snow White. Of course, he had a little help with a new type of animator who made the characters as human as possible. Case in point, Snow White, the Queen, and of course, the Prince. However, truth be told, he stole that animator from Max Fleischer. And it was that animator who created the concept of Betty Boop looking more human. One other little thing that he was ahead of everybody on was the live action and animation combination. I think there's probably a better term for it, but that's what I would call it. We've seen this here and there, especially back in the days when they couldn't really make stuff come to life, like, for instance, Bedknobs and Broomsticks. How you got that whole animated world that Angela Lansbury and the gang go to for the island of Nabumbu. Or like when Mary Poppins and Bert go into that chalkboard world, which of course becomes an animated world. Once again, Fleischer did it first with one of his little characters, Coco the Clown. He did it as a little behind the scenes gag where Coco would come out and cause some mischief. There were no other animators who were doing something like this at the time, getting an actual animated character in the real world. That's not to say that it didn't happen later, because, again, Mary Poppins, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and so many other films and cartoons have done the same thing. Fleischer used this technique several times. Once he did it as a gag for an interview he was doing where he was helping Betty Boop out. And of course, he was even talking to her, which was kind of a nice touch. It was almost like, the character's real because he makes her real. That was the whole concept. And of course, there was even moments like this little scene from Popeye here, classic moment, and a hilarious moment too. Of course, that's not to say that he didn't do movies, because there were quite a few times he did actual cartoon movies. Probably his most famous would be Gulliver's Travels, because, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. He obviously uses the rotoscoping technique to make Gulliver as lifelike as possible. Meanwhile, the other characters are, well, cartoony. It's colorful, it's incredible. The story's a little slow, and that's probably one of the things that led to its downfall. Plus, unfortunately, they were trying to compete with Disney because a couple years earlier, Walt Disney created the first full-length animated feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Gulliver's Travels was kind of meant to rival that, and unfortunately, it didn't quite work out. These days, it's kind of seen as a cult classic, and I guess it's better than nothing. Fleischer also did something very unexpected. He brought Superman to life, and this is a big deal in more ways than one, because obviously, there was no way you could bring Superman to life back then, because George Reeve didn't take the stage just yet. And not only that, this was also a huge milestone for animation, because this was the first time that they tried to make a cartoon that was more serious and more dramatic. That had never been done before, because even Snow White is more on the traditional cartoony scale, because, there's musical numbers and there's funny moments. For the Superman series, there is no musical numbers and there are no funny moments. Maybe there's a little quirky line here and there just to break up the monotony a little. But the whole thing is very serious. You get a whole bunch of moments where there's death-defying moments where Lois is in serious danger or the public, and Superman is there to save the day. Of course, because of the rotoscope technique, Superman and all the cast of characters look very real. And that's one of the best things about these old Superman cartoons. They move like real people. They look like real people. And the animation and the color is absolutely incredible beyond belief. The only thing that doesn't look exactly too real would definitely be the dinosaur from one of the cartoons. But the rest of it, it's perfect. In fact, these days, this Superman is seen as a true classic, as well as a great masterpiece, and rightfully so. One thing that he's really not given any credit for at all, in fact, I don't think anybody's ever thought about this, was that Fleischer was the first man to actually break the time limit on cartoons. As we all know, most cartoons, especially back then, only run for 6 or 7 minutes. Fleischer was the first one to break that time limit when he did his legendary cartoon, Popeye the Sailor meets Sinbad the Sailor. It's a legendary cartoon, a must-see, and I will definitely cover this one in the near future. But anyway, the big thing about this is the fact that this cartoon actually goes for 16 minutes, making it one of the longest cartoons at that time, at least until Walt Disney created Snow White. But still, Max Fleischer broke that mold before Disney did, and that is a very big deal. And sadly, he's not given any credit for it. But again, I don't think anybody ever thought about it except me. Of course, one of the things that Max Fleischer is most remembered for is his mastery of the art of multiplaning. Now, what multiplaning is, it's a technique that creates depth in cartoons. What you do is you get a background that's already painted. You have it just sitting right there. Meanwhile, you have some other objects in the midground. That would be the middle part from the back and the front. It could be sitting in the center. It could even be moving along with it. It depends what you're going for. And then, of course, you have your main characters and so on in the foreground or the front. Meanwhile, a camera is recording all the process that's going in the background, the midground, and the foreground. These things can be adjusted to go fast, slow, or you can even adjust the length of depth. That technique had been around since Disney came along because he used it for some of his cartoons back in 1937, and many other cartoonists used it as well, especially Hanna-Barbera. They were famous for doing stuff like that when they went to television. But Max Fleischer, although he didn't create multiplaning, he mastered it to a whole new level because not only would he use background animation, he would get actual models and put them in the background or the midground, and it would make the cartoon setting look so incredibly real. It was absolutely amazing. For instance, if you watch this scene from Popeye meets Sinbad, you could tell that right there is not animated. That is real. Here's another example. The forgotten cartoon Play Safe, where this kid gets aboard a train and it drives out of control. For a good part of it, you're seeing real animation. But there are moments like this where the train is definitely not animated. It's a real model train being driven on tracks. Of course, to make it look as cartoony as possible, they would have, painted over the train, give it some special colors to make it look like a cartoon. But you could tell he's using an actual train. All in all, he was ahead of his time. And nowadays, he is very much appreciated for his work, and very well loved for it. Sadly, the Fleischer Studios only went for about 25 years, but they left a legacy that continues to this day. If you ever have the time, try to look up some of his cartoons. Pretty much every one of them are on YouTube right now, including Gulliver's Travels. And while you're at it, consider that everything that I've said about all the techniques and innovative ideas that he put forth into his cartoons. This is Movie Fan, signing off.